Hello, I'm Sam Fry, and welcome to a brand new episode of Technique, the podcast where we speak to artists about their use of technology. So today's a Richard Abrams episode where he's speaking to a wonderful digital producer, writer and storyteller. It's Hazel Grian. So a number of listeners might be aware of Hazel and her work at the Pervasive Media Studio. And she does, sometimes the words are quite difficult. I'll let Hazel talk about that.
It's the actual vocabulary that, choosing what words to use. How do you describe it, this thing? Is it a thing? But digital storytelling seems to be okay, so we'll go with that.
Okay, digital storytelling it is. Thanks, Hazel. So the conversation today is actually a little bit dated. So it happened in early 2016. It was a conversation that Richard and Hazel had essentially as a standalone podcast. And it was before we even started this Technique podcast. But I'd say in some ways it was a bit of an inspiration for doing this in the first place. And it's a really interesting conversation between Richard and Hazel about digital, how it's changed over the years, and storytelling in general. It's also a little bit longer than some of our other episodes, but I'm hoping you like the style as it's a lot more conversational. The conversation starts by talking a little bit about digital as a word in the first place. So I'll leave it over to Richard and Hazel. Hey, Richard, what do you think about the word digital?
I'm finding I'm finding it quite hard when I use the word digital because I don't see anything as digital anymore. They're just mainstream and they're just different channels and technologies.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Because 10 years ago, the language we had to come up with, because this was before smartphones, we were using bits and bobs and sort of plugging things together, bits of shop-bought, bits of paraphernalia, like accelerometers and cameras and microphones, and things like the HP iPac, which came out in 2007.
Well, of course, you were working at HP, weren't you? Or you did work with them at the labs in Bristol.
That's right. Yeah, I was actually artist in residence around 2006, 7, 8, somewhere around there.
It's interesting. Sorry, that's an interesting time, and it's worth reminding anybody who listens that that's the point at which YouTube appeared, and that's the point at which the smartphone appeared, effectively as we know it.
Yeah, that's right. The iPhone 2007 and Android 2008. I say that with confidence because I've just looked it up on Wikipedia just before we started.
Wikipedia would be wrong.
My mum revealed to me yesterday that she thought WikiLeaks and Wikipedia were the same thing, and so she was really worried when I said I like Wikipedia and I've been using it. She thought I was going to have to go and live in an embassy somewhere.
Well, that's a story in itself, isn't it?
I know, but I sound like that. We sound like that to my students at the university, Anyway, so 2007, 2008, I was artist in residence at HP Labs in Bristol and got to sort of use and mess about with some of the things that they had already produced as products, like their app, which was called Emscape, which was for the iPac, which was one of these PDAs, personal digital assistant. Before there wasn't a mobile.
In fact, anybody who's listening who doesn't really remember things like that, they were. I remember the iPac. It was almost the iPhone without the phone bit.
That's right. Yeah. So it wasn't a mobile phone. It was more like the BlackBerry was in the beginning. So it's a screen with a media player with a little keyboard. With what do you call it? Like a poker.
Stylus.
Excuse me. How could I forget that? I used to have.
Well, they're back in fashion on the new iPad.
I used to have a stylophone.
Did you?
Yeah, with
Did I?
yeah, the Rolf Harris one. Oh, we don't mention his name anymore. Anyway, so yeah, they were like that. It was before people would have those separately to their mobile phones.
But I think
back
that's
then.
the crucial thing is that did give people an element of mobile pocket computing, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wasn't aware of them. I didn't. It wasn't until I was able to play with them at HP, and HP was saying, "Look, we've developed our own app for this. We're interested in locative or locative, as some people insist on saying, locative media, as in the iPac had a built-in GPS navigation unit." Sort of GPS mapping on it, so which we're now used to on our smartphones, of course, with sort of Google Maps, etc. It had that, and that was an interesting bit of kit for digital storytellers and people like the HP Labs people who were interested in that, looking forward to the future.
Tell us what you did with the iPac.
So with the HP Labs Emscape app, what you were able to do was that app gave you an interface where you could assign zones on the map, which you could drop media into. That's video or audio, and when you holding the device stepped into that zone, the GPS told the device to release that media. So it really meant you were triggering media into your headphones depending on where you stood outside and anywhere in the world, which meant then that the street, the anywhere outside became a sort of canvas for storytelling, as in what you could deliver to people in their headphones. So it could be attached to a particular place in which you were standing next to, say a church or, some other landmark. You might want to send people on a little trail, so they step into the zone near the church, and then they'd start to hear a voice recorded telling them something, and then they'd go on to the next and the next. So it was kind of non-linear storytelling to an extent, in that people could wander around a certain area, or you could find some other way of getting them to do it in a certain order.
As I recall, I think years ago you were a film director, you made short films, you went into theatre and radio. Had you done any interactive storytelling up to this point?
Till that point, no. Other than, and this is where I'm sort of keen to sort of bring this up in these conversations. Other than, I was a street theatre performer for many years, for about 12 years on and off, with a theatre company called the Natural Theatre Company, who are based in Bath. And that meant interacting with the public when they weren't expecting it, in public places or at festivals or in private events. So you're appearing in front of them as a character, as a group of characters, as a scenario, when they're least expecting it. And the key thing for us as natural theatre was not to piss people off, because we've all sat outside a cafe, maybe on holiday, and up comes a comedy waiter or something, a clown.
There's quite a lot of comedy waiters in traditional restaurants.
Right, yeah. That
boom, boom.
Yeah, that's fine. But when someone is clowning it up and toddling towards you, it's the last thing you want.
Yeah.
Is for them to be bothering you. So it absolutely weren't about that. So it's not about annoying people. It was about having extremely high quality, detailed costume and makeup, and to pass through a space to amuse and delight and interest the public, and only interact with them when invited. And those rules are what I've kept throughout all my creations of interactiveness, albeit most of them through a digital means, either on the internet as characters, writing, either, emails or comments with the audience as a character, or by directing actors in video, because you're appearing in people's lives in their everyday spaces, whether it's on their computers when they're doing their other types of business, or on their phones when they're out and about. So this is one of the big, I think, philosophical questions about where interactive or future media entertainment.
So go back to this the alternate reality game, I think, the ARG at HP. That was very much, it sounds like very much a continuation of your street theatre work, but with an intermediating technology. Whereas the next thing I think you sort of jumped to was a YouTube drama, Cape Modern, which wasn't in people's spaces, physical spaces, I suppose.
It was occasionally. It was, in fact. So, I mean, just to go back a little bit to the alternate reality games, because from my HP residence, what came out of that were two major ARGs. And the first one was called Meigeist, Meigeist. And it was through that one that I first heard about this whole idea that there was a small but dedicated community of people on the internet who already knew about these things called alternate reality games, which meant that they would work as a community to uncover and piece together pieces of a story which had been hidden like Easter eggs for them on the internet by a bunch of creatives, and they would remain anonymous, and the mystery of the story would be pieced together using things that look like everyday websites and everyday email accounts, but are actually in a fictional universe. That's when I first learnt about that, when I was looking for a way of reaching an audience. So it's always been about finding an audience, as having worked in theatre and then made short films, a bit of stand-up and that kind of thing, and frustratedly not being able to sort of get on in television because it's so limited for anyone to actually reach anyone through those means. Finding people and communicating with them immediately through Web 2.0 and the immediate communications available through the internet. That's why I got into alternate reality gaming. And that first one, Meigeist, and the second one, which was called The Sky Remains, both part funded by HP, they were mammoth projects, which I equate with making a TV drama with a tiny, tiny budget.
I mean, they certainly have that complexity in the way they play out, but did they have the technical complexity, for instance, that a TV drama would have, rather than just the intellectual and narrative complexity?
Depends what you mean by technical.
Well, I mean, you know when you make a TV series, and we've both worked in TV.
I've never worked in TV.
Have you not? Oh, I thought
never.
You have. Oh,
never.
Really?
That's what I mean. I've never worked in TV.
Well, there's always a big team of people, like film and theatre. There's always a significant number of people. There's a significant amount of technicalities that you have to deal with, such as lighting, camera, sound, all of that sort of stuff.
Sure.
That, is a massive overhead. And even now, with sort of cheaper democratic technology, people are still spending lots of money on kit, albeit nowhere near as much.
No, we didn't. Yeah, obviously we didn't do any of that. We were making up as we went along. When I say we, there were two of us.
Right.
I mean, John was a boy genius, young. He had graduated, John Williams. He knew how to code the fuck out of any problem. He did all the kind of technical coding and designing, the digital designing, and I guess I was the director, producer, writer, and he had lots of creative ideas as well. So we were a 2-person team.
Okay.
And it was on the back of that, of each doing about 10 different jobs ourselves. Me using my credit card, me raising funding as we were actually developing the thing. And then we ran it for 8 weeks. So it was an 8-week, but every day.
Wow.
Oh, not 24/7, because I did get some sleep. But so it was like a live show that wasn't just on like 1 hour per week. It was on 8 hours a day for 8 months. And the way that we knew the audience were there was mainly through following them on forums that are run by the Alternate Reality Gaming Network, because there were other various mysterious projects like this on the go at the same time. So we would then log into the forums anonymously and watch them solving the problems as a community. And that's the difference too. So the audience we called players, and they would be working together. I've always thought that would be, in television terms, that would be, you'd watch that in itself. You know, it's like a spectator sport in itself, watching people solving the problems. So those were the kinds of things that we were doing. And I used some of my actor mates from the Natural Theatre Company because I knew they could improvise, because not all actors can improvise, I now realise. So I used them to play characters within My Geist, and then transferred some of those characters into The Sky Remains to make it the same universe as well. So the fans, the players, got to know and love them through this kind of intimate email exchanges, which I was writing actually, and also through their video blogging and stuff like that. So you get to know characters that way.
What were the biggest sort of problems you hit in doing this? Apart from money, money's always a problem. But
biggest problems were really trying to help the audience, the players, navigate them from one clue to the next, trying to make sure that they got the right amount of challenge that they wanted, matched with the right amount of satisfaction. So it's getting the timing right, because of the liveness of it and the ease with which we found we could make new clues and drop new little breadcrumbs, as it were. We were watching on the fly, and if they were struggling with a particular little digital puzzle that would give them a cryptic clue, or they were going down a sort of bit of a dead end, moving on to the next chapter of the story, we had to come up with ways of helping them along with that. So I would say that was the biggest problem, was actually one of the most creative parts of it too, the most enjoyable parts of it. With My Guys, there really wasn't any problems other than those.
Okay.
With The Sky Remains, we tried to do something differently, and we hit problems with that because there were probably just too many barriers. It was such a large scale thing. What we tried to do was to use a whole other community of people who were using GPS technology and try and fuse them together with the alternate reality gamers. And that didn't quite work. I'll just explain that. So The Sky Remains, it was partly a research project for HP Labs. They wanted to see how people would be engaging with alternate reality games now that HP knew about them through what we had done. What John and I wanted to do was to try and create a bigger audience by fusing two different communities together. So geocaching, have you heard about geocaching?
I have, but if you want to explain it, you'll feel free.
Yeah, so it's really kind of sort of keen ramblers and walkers who have GPS location devices with them to help them navigate their way around, wildernesses and moors and all that kind of thing. Over the past few years, some of those people have developed a nice little thing where you could hide a box in a hedge or in an old stone wall or whatever, and geotag it onto the geocacher's community map, so that you'd see a flag in the map online and you'd know that there was a box there. So as you were going out on that particular ramble, you could use your locator to find that box, open it, and there'd be an actual little notepad in there and pencils. You could write a note or take a photo or something. And it was just something that had occurred to people quite naturally. And I thought that was a really lovely experiential thing. It's this lovely mixture of real world just activities and nice things that people are doing being enabled by technology. So we're not stuck in front of a computer screen. This is my big thing, is to get us away from that. So we thought, that's an ideal way of giving people clues to a story or chapters to a story, and it's almost traditional in that you would uncover some, hidden letters or photographs. It's classic sort of adventure novel stuff, isn't it?
It is, and it's also adding a layer of interest, other than the walking itself for people. So, it's taking part in a story that's embedded in what they do and in their landscape.
Yeah. So the sort of key thing there is, and I still don't think I mean, with all our smartphones and everything, we haven't cracked this yet. This is still not a thing which people are accepting in a mainstream way, which is engaging with fictional story while they're doing something else.
I've seen
problem. That's the main problem.
Yeah, I've seen people engage with factual stories. So. Living in and around London, you see walking tours.
Yeah, we'll do that. All of that, we'll do that.
Yeah.
But even like a sort of Jack the Ripper tour or something like that, you're not doing something else while you're doing it. You're walking along, but you've deliberately gone on that. And even if somebody dressed as a Victorian gentleman or something appears, people will go along with that. But trying to engage people with story when they are shopping or on a ramble or doing their emails or something is still a minority thing.
I kind of have a thing going back. I worked on early interactive television in the early 90s and then through practically on and off till the mid-2000s. And one of the things I noticed there was, all the experiments with making shows like Emmerdale Interactive and stuff that we did in the 90s, they never really struck home. But what happened with interactive narratives for me on television was the rise of reality television, where you had a semblance of reality and factual, but actually that was guided as a narrative, and it needed that sort of reality hook.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And so you're saying the interactive fitted with that is the voting and the social media conversation
all of that
around
was highly interactive, but also it was narrative. I mean, the Susan Boyle thing on Britain's Got Talent, if you search for that now on YouTube and watch it, what they do is use the way they've set it up, the way they edit it in retrospect. They retold the Ugly Duckling story.
Nice, yeah.
And when you watch it in the cold light of day now, that's exactly what it is. But to everybody out there, they think it's reality. So they hang on it as if it's factual and real in a way these people will walk around London with factual stories. But if you said this is fiction, they wouldn't have interacted with it in the same way.
No, because I suppose it's the element of danger and the unknown, isn't it? It's that kind of...
That could be them. There's jeopardy, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because it feels real, it could be that person watching it who is there.
I think
they could be the exposed one.
All people ever want is authenticity.
Yeah.
I mean, what people react to is the authentic, and whether you're telling a fictional or factual story. That's what you're trying for, I think. When you talked about Emmerdale being interactive in the 90s, what did you mean by it then? What did you do?
What we did was we had a proprietary technology, an early set-top box. We had handsets that people in the house had, and when they watched Emmerdale, they could press a button, and that became the red button as we know it later on, and it would overlay graphics, and the graphics were synchronized to the television programs, so they could do several things. They could, if they'd come in halfway through, they could catch up with what had happened. We could turn it into a game show where we were asking questions about the story and the backstory as it was running. So the engine was used for Mastermind and all the quiz shows as well. But then there was magazine content around it. Now, remember, this is about the same time as the web was emerging. So we didn't have the web as an example particularly. So, for instance, I remember on Emmerdale and Coronation Street, we had street maps that you could roll over on your television screen and find out who lived in what house and all that. And it was the contextual, factual stuff, effectively.
That's what I want now. That's what we want.
Well, you couldn't get people to really use it, otherwise those companies would still be thriving.
I don't know, maybe. So would that be instead of watching Coronation Street, would you still have Coronation Street on your TV screen?
No, Coronation Street was running underneath it. So
overlaid on top.
It was overlaid on top.
You'd press a button you'd have like a remote thing in your hand. And the map would appear.
Yeah, you could pull up the map. It was semi-transparent. You could see what was going off underneath. And I did all sorts of things. I did for one major cartoon sort of children's channel. I turned that same sort of thing in the mid-2000s into games that sat over the top of programs. So while you were watching programs, you could play games that were only active in one square of the screen at a time. So it would keep people's eyes fixed on the TV screen and enhance what was going off, but actually was two separate things. And there was loads and loads of experiments like this. And they largely failed. I mean, there's none of that technology still around because what happened is the smartphone came out and the sort of interactivity moved over to the handset.
But that doesn't mean that they would have failed had the development money not been put into them, does it? If the smartphone hadn't happened...
There was a huge amount of money put into these interactive TV systems, a huge amount invested.
The ones that you worked on?
Yeah, because we were doing things like early interactive Channel 4 racing. We were putting overlays on racing so you could place bets through it and you could pull up odds. So it was like super teletext, that I remember.
So it was connected. It
was connected via a very slow modem, so you could update things quickly.
So, and then where were those kind of changes registered? Do you know what I mean? So,
you would...
If you took part in a quiz, how did...
Oh, the process of that, the earliest one was simply this. We had a play-out room, just like a normal TV channel. We had people operating the buttons. We had pre-recorded tapes of the programs with time codes, and we attached everything to the times on the time codes. And people had X number of seconds to answer things according to what was happening on screen. And if there was any overriding needed, the people in the booth would override it live. The signal would go out over the air. This was terrestrial television. Into the box, stop, do its work on the app that was running in the box. And then it would ping back via the modem. And that whole modem back to us and then back out would take about 30 seconds. So if somebody played Interactive Family Fortunes, when the show finished, within 30 seconds we could send them a top leaderboard and their position on the leaderboard.
Okay, so so how many people would be playing then is it just the experiment?
Yeah, it was all prototype. It was launched as a service, that one in particular, but it was only in a limited area, so we only had a few thousand people playing at any one time.
So, but how many people took part then?
Well, like I say, a few thousand people. So we actually did run it as a service. So it was run as a service. We got customer complaints. We got all the usual stuff services get.
But did everyone take part who was invited
the actual percentage of people who picked up the service and had the service actually did take part in a lot of the shows, yeah.
So it wasn't a failure in terms of the users.
No, it was a failure in terms of the business.
So the idea itself.
Well, the interaction mode, and I think the nature of it, and the nature of the fact that people at the time couldn't go online and look something up. It was pulling up information about who lived in what house in the street. You know, it would allow you a sense that you were playing along with Mastermind. All of that stuff you still do. You know, if you go on Twitter now and you, when University Challenge is on, it always trends every week.
Oh yeah,
and people, you know, people are shouting at the screen saying, "Oh, I knew that. And I remember back in '94, you know, that almost being our company slogan. You know, it was all about satisfying that I knew that, and now I can show you.
Right.
The
BBC, maybe it was BBC R&D, I'm not sure. They did that with an app for the Antiques Roadshow, which I used to actually use. It's not available now. So that was for iPad.
Yeah, we did Antiques Roadshow in the 90s, exactly that thing.
Okay, so a couple of years ago,
with the BBC permission. Obviously, we worked with BBC Channel 4 Sky, etc. So there were people who had done all that sort of thing. So the Antiques Roadshow thing was just effectively the same game we'd had all those years before.
Okay, yeah, and I think this worked by listening in to something in the sound that's coming out of your TV.
That's right. Yeah, there's slightly different ways of triggering things, but you know, essentially the experience was the same.
But what that reminded me of was, what was good about that version of the Antiques Roadshow game was that it followed what the audience were already doing, rather than making something then trying to get an audience to do it.
Well, I think this is the thing. I think you know all this time on, there was an audience by that time, and the fact you were using an iPad means the audience were connected. We didn't have any of that. You know, a lot of the people we had didn't have PCs. So we were fighting all that connectivity issue effectively, and fighting the fact people weren't used to interacting.
But like if you remember, there's an episode of the Royal Family where they're watching the Antiques Roadshow, and they're betting on how much it's going to be worth.
Yeah.
The second's up to where he says it, and it's kind of like the BBC then went, well, loads of people are doing that. We're going to try and make an app where you get to.
I know, but what I find ironic about that is I agree with you, they did, but they'd already done it with us in the 90s. You know, it's interesting that actually one of the interesting things about those big organisations is they don't seem to have a memory. Because we spent years doing all those prototypes with the BBC's permission, because obviously we had to get the producers involved. Because we were broadcasting things over the top of their programmes, you know. So they knew about it, so they did revive it. Now, I think when they saw that Royal Family episode, I think it must have reminded a new generation of producers that actually it's really compelling shouting at the telly. You know?
Yeah.
Which is what that comes down to, isn't it?
But then it also comes down to why don't we just shout at the telly? Why do we need
quite
a digital help?
I don't think anybody's ever answered that. Tell us a little bit about Cape Modern, and the reason I'm interested in Cape Modern partly is because it was YouTube, but also I remember sitting at a conference with you where somebody was talking, who shall remain nameless, about Cape Modern as if they'd made it themselves, and that person said, does anybody here remember Cape Modern? And you put your hand up and said, yeah, I wrote it.
I don't remember that.
Don't you remember that? Oh, it was a particularly tense moment.
That from my memory. Cape Modern was actually situated on Bebo, which for younger listeners is like Facebook before Facebook put Bebo out of business, basically. So that was one of the early social networking sites.
I'd forgotten about Bebo.
Yeah, so there was MySpace and Bebo.
I thought Cape Modern was YouTube. Yeah, it was. It was Bebo. You were right.
It was Bebo, and that's what made it interactive.
Yeah.
in a sense, was that Bebo were at that time, and I think is it Amanda Shields, who then went to Google and is now in the House of Lords. I'm not sure. I don't.
Yeah, one of them is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was at Bebo at that time, and Bebo were looking into how they could monetize audiences and attract sponsorship and move into the online entertainment field. And in the States on YouTube, and maybe that's what you were thinking of, a couple of guys in the States and their team had come up with a realistic seeming YouTube blogger who the character called herself Lonely Girl.
Oh, I am. I'm
15.
conflating the two. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So I think it was Lonely Girl 15. Yeah. So she was a 15-year-old lonely girl. So she's cute and she's doing her video blogging. And at that time, it was kind of sort of post-Blair Witch. Nothing particularly had been done. And this is still a really contentious field that doesn't quite work. This kind of alternate reality within the reality kind of thing. So you're not really framing it properly. You're just saying this looks really real, and it's not flagged up as a fiction, a show. But discerning viewers quickly realised that it was a show, and it got a lot of followers. So, in terms of a traditional TV drama, like a kind of Heroes or Lost or something. It's got this kind of sci-fi cultish story of a girl being drawn into that cult and sort of mythical sort of bloodletting and those kinds of things, girls being kidnapped and all that kind of thing. Done for a very, very, very low budget. And it proved a point that lots and lots of viewers and fans could be attracted to something on YouTube that was plonked in without any marketing and no budget. So on the back of that, they got a bit of money, did a deal with Bebo, possibly the London offices, and devised a entirely new show for Bebo, which would be based around video blogging by characters, and they called it Cape Modern, which is obviously a play on Tate Modern. Now, after I made my Geist, my alternate reality game, I'd gone to LA on the back of that, meeting people who were kind of the forefathers of alternate reality games, who were 42 Entertainment at the time, Steve Peters and others. I'd met with them, and I was out there kind of trying to drum up some kind of interest and trade and see what else I could do next, maybe raise some money. And I met another alternate reality game producer called Jan Libby. She calls herself Stories with 3 or 4 E's. There's quite a few women in this field. And I met with her in Santa Monica, and she said, the guys who made Lonely Girl 15 are starting a thing in London and they're looking for writers. And so my last day in LA, I went and met with them, and they kind of offered me the job. So back in London, I started production on that, and I became one of the kind of story creators and script writers for that, season 1 of that. What I did say to them, so they had this kind of idea that a really popular character would be a posh English girl who'd been to a public school, that would be a thing that worked. And I said, well, actually, that's not going to work. People aren't going to relate to her. They're not going to like her. She needs to be in every...
I think it's worth saying, if anybody listens to this and they're abroad outside the UK, a public school is a private school.
Oh, yeah, private
It's a stupid quirk of the English.
Yes, it certainly is. It is, yeah. So, it may be that for certain American audiences, they see upper class, middle to upper class English people, a bit like Downton Abbey or whatever. That's very popular, and that is bound to work in any circumstance. But what we know is that certainly British people won't see that favourably. They won't, unless they're a comedy character, they won't feel on a par with a kind of everyday posh girl, unless they're in another period in history altogether or something like that, But they didn't change that, and in the end, that was the problem. And they actually ended up replacing the actress, getting rid of Kate and keeping the other characters who were much more kind of your East End.
Much more street.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, it was a soap opera with a sci-fi, undertones not undertones, in your face sci-fi hokum, which was that again in the world of Lonely Girl 15 with this kind of cult. And
so how was the interactivity handled?
Right, so each Bebo account page, like Facebook, has ways in which each person can have their friends and followers interact with them. So you can leave comments, so you can post your own videos, leave comments, comment back on your friends, attach little widgets and sort of proto apps where you can draw pictures and all that kind of thing. So we used each character in the soap had their own page, and each day a different character would post a new short video. So the content we were making was, in video terms, was a kind of very short video, but being uploaded every day. And because of my background with improvisation and writing and comedy and all of that, I developed the idea that we could use the comments as a live interaction from character with the fans. So the audience for this we called fans rather than players. So that was the interaction. So they could say, "Hey Charlie, saw your video, you better watch out for that guy," etc. And she would say, "Oh no, I'm sure he's fine. How are you?" And this kind of thing. So a really nice, personable, immediate interaction took place, and that really developed a nice relationship with the fans. And those who didn't want to particularly interact on that level could look in and watch. And then out of game, as it were, out of that fictional universe, there was a Kate Modern page on Bebo where each week all of the videos were available to be seen together, so that it wasn't too difficult for people to catch up and see it as a fiction. So that's kind of moving on from what we were doing with the alternate reality games, where we never admitted it was a fiction.
Yeah.
We never let you see behind the curtain. So that was the kind of interactivity. Plus, once a month, there was a live event. So what I'd been doing, which I'd learned from alternate reality games and from my street theatre background, was to have actual places, actual events where the players or fans would come and take part in or witness part of the story in real life, rather than just on the computer. So we had that happen as well. And of course that was filmed, and then that was put online too. And the device that we used for the videoing was that, a bit like Cloverfield, which is that, of course, if it's meant to be video blogging, then there's no invisible camera person. The camera is always there, being held by a character. So you're always referring to the fact that the camera is being held. And that's a trope now, particularly in cinema.
Just briefly, if you could talk, because you mentioned Cloverfield. I know you did work for JJ Abrams Star Trek movie.
Nice segue.
Yeah, no, well, I know. I mean, just talk for a minute about the notion of work. I mean, people can search for that, and there's tons of stuff around about that online. But you worked on the Star Trek ARG for the first reboot Star Trek movie.
Yes, that came about because obviously JJ Abrams had created and directed Lost, a TV show which was deliberately mysterious and left many clues, and had something of an online presence as well. And JJ Abrams himself was aware of the alternate reality games, some of which had been created as extra stuff for movie fans science fiction movie fans to do online in the first.
Well, there's a whole plethora of stuff around Lost, wasn't there? From books that featured in the series to absolutely all sorts.
Right, yeah. So that was one of the first really mainstream experiments with what is now defined as transmedia.
Yeah.
Different ways in, multi-platform, as it were, different ways into a story universe that gives just, more and more pleasure and interest to fans. So JJ Abrams was a fan of that himself. And being a fan is what has made him a success as a director with Star Trek and Star Wars. To cut a long story short, he wanted to have something of an alternate reality game around the launch of his first Star Trek movie. And that somehow went through the market. That often went through marketing budgets, that kind of thing. And it went through the marketing budget and came to the London offices of Paramount Distributors.
Yeah.
They had a small bit of budget, which they had to then do the bidding of JJ, the director, and somehow said, well, he wants this sort of alternate reality game thing, whatever that's supposed to be, with no idea. What shall we do? It so happens that the people who make the viral video campaigns for Paramount London's movie launches are based in Bristol. They're called Rubber Republic, and they're friends of mine. So it came to them. JJ Abrams wants an alternate reality game for the launch of the movie, and it fits in with our budget, and it's got to be sort of UK, a bit of Germany, and a bit of France. We're just going to fudge it around. What can you do? So they said, who can we call? Hazel Grian. So that turned into one of the most fun jobs I've ever done. So that meant going back to old school alternate reality gaming, which was creating, and it wasn't just us in Bristol. There was kind of some digital guys in London and other parts of the country who were creating crazily difficult physics puzzles and all kinds of stuff, and directions were coming through JJ's Bad Robot producer, whose name I can't remember, I'm sorry, Dave. JJ would like this, we've got this Romulan storyline at this end, so they were producing some of the kind of serious side of the story to do with the Romulans crash landing on Earth and that kind of thing. So they were feeding us that, because that dovetailed into the beginning of that movie when a Romulan spaceship comes through a wormhole. I don't know if you remember.
I saw the movie, yeah.
That's
I'm
what
aware
happened.
of it.
So it was, it was kind of expanding on that part of the story.
I mean, this kind of went big budget, didn't it? Because I know you got, I say big budget, I mean, obviously attached to anything that high profile is going to make it seem bigger than it, probably is. But you did have, I know, contributions, I think, from people like Leonard Nimoy and stuff in there.
Well, that was JJ Abrams pulling favours at the other end. So again, like I'd done with my first ARG, we were kind of making it up as we went along. And it ran for several weeks. So there was lots of these sort of online puzzles for them to solve. They used the Star Trek forum online. So there was a real mixture of people who had no idea what was going on. They were Star Trek fans who were just looking up about the film, and they could see all these people. So what the hell are they doing there? They seem to be trying to solve something. So they followed some links. So the people who were playing this game, there's usually several thousand, tens of thousands, were doing it that way. So we were following them in various forums and creating loads of content. Some of it from me. I was playing kind of characters, blokes called Jeff in Berkshire, who were emailing because they'd found a UFO crash landing site and things like that. And then we had a French friend of ours who we had him with he'd found a sort of Romulan intercom device, which we had to have made exactly according to the to the film production values. So that was exciting and expensive, things like that. So we used everything that was free that we possibly could, and this is the characteristic, the nature of digital storytelling as a grassroots phenomenon. This is the democratization of reaching audiences. We use everything that's open and free.
You were a creative director at Aardman Digital for a while, and you're now lecturing at UWE, among other things. And that kind of brings us up to date. What I'm sort of interested in then is, if you think back over that sort of decade, and I mean, those things we've talked about there are absolutely amazing and groundbreaking, but, one of the things I think you've said to me before in conversations, that you felt that established media often hasn't taken much notice of these interactive narratives and games and things that sit around that, and that maybe advertising has taken it much more seriously.
Yeah, maybe somehow it has, but that's still kind of counterintuitive if I say that broadcasting didn't take it up because of the business model being like zero, and its scalability. Small amount of people having a really good time and paying nothing for it is, contrary to how both broadcasting and advertising has worked from its beginnings until now, when it's, everything's been blown apart and they're trying to decide what to do. In
a way, broadcast media has been struggling with this type of thing, whereas I think advertisers have had to go and find audiences.
Exactly. So they went and found people, and because they are, targeting certain demographics, specific demographics, often younger demographics, they found them online. And now, of course, on their smartphones and using social media. So advertisers went and found them there. It's not new in that McDonald's built children's playgrounds next to schools and Ronald McDonald was there to entice the children in to McDonald's. That's true. So it's kind of a bit like that. And so advertisers were toying with, experimenting with ways in which to engage demographics online.
It's true. My 8-year-old son, if you look on somewhere on my website, I've got him filmed a couple of years ago. I asked him, what do you think about TV? And he said, TV sucks. And I said, why? And he said, you can't get what you want when you want it. And for him as an 8-year-old, he lives online, But he's just today had to ask me how to find ITV on a standard Freeview television to watch Ninja Warrior. He doesn't actually know the thing about entering a number in to find a channel.
Right.
Which I think is to me, it's stunning. It's a complete
there's obviously there's iPlayer and there's 4OD. And
all the online catch-up services, absolutely, but there's no scheduling, and they are click on demand, and they are,
and ITV a bit more restricted? I don't know. And Netflix is producing its own stuff now. It's changing in that
there's
way.
Also the rise of the YouTuber, making young people making content for young people.
Well, that's another part of advertising that I've recently been involved with through this kind of crazy digital experimentation community that I am involved with in Bristol, which we should talk about really, the Pervasive Media Studio, which I've been a member of since 2007, since it opened, 2008. By hanging around there, I've got to do most of the creative, new technology, emerging platform experiments that I've done in those years. And recently, I just helped out really with a small company who their client was Xbox, but it kind of opened my eyes actually to the fact that advertisers were totally zoned straight in to these young people who have millions of followers on YouTube, and we did a bit of filming with a couple of these young guys who had made a lot of money out of their really low budget videos of themselves just being really enthusiastic about playing a particular console game, and had millions of followers because of it. And yeah, they are bringing in the revenue. And
well,
the advertisers are paying for that. That's why. But their enthusiasm, and they're not spending any money on their videos. And while we were out filming with them, young lads walking their dogs and etc. were stopping and asking to have their photographs taken with them because they recognise them.
Well, that's my son. He's if I ever hear Stampy Longnose laugh again, I'm going to strangle him. But he's a classic case in point. The guy has built his own media business off the back of playing games.
Can't you get your son to start his own?
He has got 3 videos online, and he's starting to do it at 8 years old.
How 8? Is it? How old is he? 8.
8.
Yeah. That's old enough for Richard.
Yeah.
I think.
No, but I mean, the point.
You got to think your pension fund isn't what it could be. I'm sure you know.
Well, my pension fund's fine.
Okay.
It's one thing I have got. But I think advertisers have gone where the audiences are. I think it's something that you have said before when I've seen you speak, that you had issues with, not issues, but finding the audience for these things, because sometimes some of these interactive stories that sit around things that we don't know whether they call them transmedia or interactive or whatever, they're just stories really. They do take a while to find an audience, and that audience isn't necessarily visible.
See, again, it's funny, isn't it? It's when we talk about the YouTubers and how popular they are, that again, it's not fiction, is it? They're just being themselves.
No, you're right. It isn't.
Or a version of themselves. They're creating.
But they do create fiction. I mean,
yeah. I'm not saying they're not. Or I'm saying it's a certain. It's not. They're not fictional characters in the traditional way.
Not in the traditional way. I mean, Stampy is a good case in point in that I've watched Stampy's Race to the Moon, which is a complete in the Minecraft world story arc. But it is about them playing the game in order to do this. So I don't know if it's a story so much as in a traditional sense. It is a story, clearly, but
I don't know. Is Stampy a fictional character?
No,
Is it
Stampy Longnose is just the guy's online name, so his YouTube channel comes under that name. But he's a gamer.
Right. Okay. So he's a real person. He's not.
So he's a real person.
Not someone in a.
No, and Stampy and his mates online set challenges, and they issue videos every day along these challenges, and these challenges are effectively stories. They're not effectively. He shouldn't even use the word. They just are stories. Stampy's Race to the Moon, or whatever it was called, is about him and his mates using Minecraft to get to the Minecraft moon, and all that sort of stuff, and the challenges they face, but it is always couched in non-fictional terms. In that it's a challenge, they're trying to overcome something, whereas they are not putting themselves into a character in the game as such.
It wouldn't look authentic because you've got it's the low budgetness video, YouTube, small screen, etc.
Yeah.
It only looks authentic if it's a real person or something's very, very real about it. Do you know what I mean? That kind of that low budget handheld feel.
I mean, it isn't authentic, is it, in reality? But it somehow feels authentic.
Yeah. So if you try and do something fictional, it doesn't look authentic because you haven't got enough budget. So this is what I'm trying to sort of get at is that fictional story worlds are obviously still extremely popular. And it's not that we're turning away from them, but at the moment they are television-based, long-form. The most successful ones are long-form television dramas like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And ours Sherlock, the miniseries, but Sherlock's incredibly popular worldwide. So that kind of television craft is still very much in demand for fiction. So what do we do when we are aiming to create fictional worlds using open source media, and we have very little budget except for maybe a bit of marketing budget for something else?
Well, you have a restriction, don't you? I'm summarising here, I think, correctly, that what you're saying is that if you put the money in, you can make incredibly good, complex, long-form dramas that people do want to watch. And I mean, things like Game of Thrones is an incredibly long-form drama. It's 5 series and counting or whatever.
It started with novels, though.
No, I get that. And
literature is the start. Literature is the start for most of these successful franchises.
But it is incredibly long, but it is also costly. Whereas you get to Sherlock, and Sherlock isn't quite so long in the sense of the typical British way of only producing 3 episodes. But the 3 episodes are 90 minutes, so you're getting effectively 3 feature films worth, which is a long story.
And that's the best we can afford in Britain, and it's done spectacularly well. I mean, we are brilliant at costume drama as well.
But then there are kids like Stampy who are on YouTube. He's got 4 million followers regularly, 4 million viewers, and he's making 20-minute videos, which are just screen grabs, which are just recording him playing games with virtually no money. And yet, I would say my son finds that a more compelling drama in some ways than some of the stuff he sees on television.
Yeah, I guess it's down to individual tastes, and we're not saying that it's an either-or situation.
No, of course not. Nothing ever is.
I mean, I've not seen Mr. Stampy, but it sounds really, really creative to me. I'm excited how creative and joyful. I'm trying to make new words here.
His audience love him.
That is fantastic. My biggest thrill is the idea of audiences really loving stuff, because audiences don't want things to fail. They don't want to be disappointed. They don't want things to be rubbish. They want to love things. They're there crossing their fingers for anyone who makes anything. And I love it when it pays off. And it's really interesting to see what actually makes that work, and it isn't money, is it, or special effects?
Well, this brings me back to something else you said, I think, to me before, that you felt that in a way the attempts at making interactive narratives, transmedia narratives, whatever you want to call them, ARGs, 10 years ago were more complex. But yet, in recent years, you think storytellers have made their ideas more simple for lots of reasons. And in some ways, they've become more real, and they've often crossed back over into the real world much more now in order to convey the story. I mean, could you expand a little bit on what sort of lies behind that? I think the words you used were striking to me, because you mentioned producing minimum viable products, and that's a project management term, in the sense that you produce the basic version of the website or whatever, you launch it, and then you do the iterative improvements. And you've sort of mentioned this, that you feel things have become quite stripped back, but they've got really sort of to the nub of the idea more.
Yeah, and maybe it's a question of the people involved have gone through 10 years or so, and I suppose I'm only speaking of the people that I know particularly who are making digital interactive stories, experiences. And also, as we've talked about, the technology has become much more integrated and much more mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, in a sense, taken away the necessity of having different bits of technology can only work in certain circumstances. And I think it's become a bit slicker and a bit more pared down and mainstream because of the smartphone being what it is, in a way. As for the people, we've gone through a kind of highly experimental phase where we tried everything as it should be, and maybe now, we still haven't earned enough money. Suddenly, didn't mean to kind of get all choked up there. It's like got a little bit of a dry throat from talking. We haven't made, maybe, I'm just
Quick,
speculating.
let's get a drink.
We haven't
Hazel.
made our fortunes. We haven't had a hit. We still haven't reached that thing. So we've got to the point where, we've just got to produce a product that, and some of the people I've spoken to have said, like Alex Fleetwood, who is a veteran of, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me describing him as that, although he's younger than me.
He is a veteran. I've seen him around for years. Yeah.
Yeah, a veteran of real world games and trying every kind of platform from paper through to the most sophisticated software to deliver experiences and try experimenting with these sort of things. I think he said to me recently, I now just make things people love. Which sounds trite, but if I just put it in context, we're talking about what do you do when we tried all these complex things, and we need to make money. You have to make a living and have a proper job doing this, and to focus on something and put all the learning we've had into one product is probably a more satisfying and more efficient way of using all the learning that we have learned over the past 10 or 15 years. And I'm just trying to think of the game. It's an actual physical tabletop game, like a toy.
He's doing Fabulous Beasts, isn't he?
Fabulous Beasts, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah. So that was Alex's example of saying, well, let's make things people love. But
it is product.
And that's by no means to say that is in any way a step backwards or a negative step or anything like that. That's what lots of people are concentrating on. Steve Peters, who I mentioned earlier, who's now who was like the forefather of alternate reality games. His latest project, which I was quite honoured and happy to be a little bit involved in, was called Dark Detours. So that was a social media Halloween story, which he made with Alison Norrington, who's very much interested in the digital story world and is a writer herself. That was really a Twitter, Facebook, I think Google Plus, mini ARG. Really, you followed a couple of characters on Halloween in a traditional horror story, which ended up on Dartmoor, and there's various creatures and deaths and that kind of thing. But that was a very simple, it's about a product. We're no longer saying, this is not a game. We're saying this is a product. This is an experience. We're having to. I think it's something that Steve Peters described very well once when I saw him speak in San Francisco, was that if you think of the novel when it was novel, the page turner, the idea that a story would be contained within pages, trying to explain to people how they should do that.
Yeah.
And the experiments, when you think of the experiments that people like, like Robinson Crusoe, like, Daniel Defoe, and certainly Jane Austen and Mary Shelley, the experiments they did within the novel, they were using the diary form and letters, and they were, Defoe published Robinson Crusoe anonymously as a true story.
That's right.
Of a man marooned. So it's in a way no different.
Well, I don't think it is different at all, is it? I mean, there are still people publishing things, like you said, that go on purport to be real, but obviously aren't once you dig in.
And it's a way of trying to give authenticity.
Yeah.
But also, you have to somehow. This is what we're struggling with a book, well, even a digital book. You know how many pages it is. You know how long the thing is going to be, and how long what you need to do. You turn the page just to read the next bit. You can't. We sort of know that mechanic. A film, you kind of know it's so many minutes long, and you kind of sit there and you watch it, and you try not to shout. That kind of thing. We're still trying to learn what to do. In the past 10 years, we've been trying to teach people what to do with the things we were experimenting with, and some people really, really, really enjoyed it, and many other people, it was, they weren't that kind of person. It didn't reach that,
So are you saying then that in the last 10 years we've gone from what were effectively computer-based things through smartphones and back out into real-life objects? So we've got, great things like Hello Lampposts that occurred in Bristol, where you could talk to the street furniture via your phone. We've got people building things with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, objects that react to you. We've got much more robotics in which there's potential for storytelling there, and there are real-life objects around you that you can interact with, but that in a way, the ARGs, and going back, standard narratives, right back to Robinson Crusoe, the framework they established are still driving the sort of form, if you like.
The thing with ARGs was that they were partly in the real world as well. Yeah. That was the thing.
That was a crucial step, wasn't it?
Yeah, the technology was just a bit kind of separate and clunky before smartphones, or before sensors got cheaper and more miniature, before we had Arduino and Raspberry Pi and open source platforms like that. But it was about, you might see an advert in a shop window and it's got your name on it. ARGs were as much about that and illusion and magic and street theatre. But the kinds of things you've just mentioned, like Hello Lamppost, the Playable City competition, which comes out each year from Bristol, and it's now worldwide. There's a whole school of terminology which calls that transmedia now. Yeah. Now that might be another discussion for another day, Richard, because
I get that. Yeah.
I tend to think that is almost an anti-grassroots term, which is going to drive those things.
Oh, this goes back to that early comment, about digital. What's the point sticking the word digital in front of anything anymore? It's all digital. It's all trans. It's all interactive. At some point.
Yeah, there's that. But if you put a hook on it like transmedia, what I'm saying is that then that's taking it away from the grassroots and the democratizing.
It's making it a movement.
It's making it a commercial entity. It's making it an industry.
Oh, that's the thing, the industrialization of it.
Yeah, and it leaves a lot of people behind who are not going to make any money out of it.
Well, I think it's partly a success of
I've got a feeling it may very well be the same groups that have always been left behind.
So that was Richard Adams speaking to Hazel Grian. As I said before, it's a bit of an old recording, but my gosh, hasn't Hazel done a lot of really cool stuff. Plus, you can tell that there are some really difficult subjects in the area of digital storytelling that are quite challenging to work out, actually, what does the future look like for that whole industry. For those that are interested, the music for today came from Josh Woodford, which was the last track, and the other track was by a band called Jazar. So in other news, we've got a bit of an update. So we've recently had a Technique event at the V&A as part of their digital design weekend, which went really well. We had 3 artists there, Rachel Ara, then Nick Rothwell, and finally Shelley James, and each of them were awesome speakers. So thanks very much to anyone that's listening to this who came to that talk. And I'm delighted to say we've also got another event coming up. The next event is slightly different. It's going to be a networking event for artists that are using technology in some way, and it's going to be held at IBM's building in London South Bank. It's on the 19th of October from 6 till 8 p.m, and there's going to be a bit of a panel discussion at the event about artificial intelligence and its role in the creative process. So if you're an artist who is using technology in some way and this sounds interesting to you, you can find out more on the Technique website, technique.create-hub.com. And of course, while you're at it, why not check out Create Hub as well? That's create-hub.com. There's always lots more articles by people who are exploring technology in the cultural industries in some way, whether for a cultural organisation like a museum or a theatre, or otherwise as an individual artist who's creating something with technology. Anyway, that's all we've got time for this month. We'll be back again next month with another interview with an artist talking about how they're using technology. In the meantime, take very good care of yourselves.